Lightning cracked across the evening sky as Kofi Mensah, the proud son of a fearless and upright community leader, pulled into a quiet parking spot beside a small row of shops. He had only stepped out of his father's old sedan for a moment when three figures emerged from the shadows, whispering and watching him with sharp, hostile eyes. Their sudden appearance felt wrong, but Kofi tried to ignore them, unaware that these men had been waiting for a chance to strike at his family. For years his father, Chief Bemba Mensah, had refused to help their criminal network, turning down every offer, threat, and bribe they pushed his way. Tonight they saw Kofi alone, and they saw an opportunity to hurt the man they hated. Kofi barely closed the car door before they moved toward him, circling him with slow, deliberate steps. Their smirks held a promise of trouble, but Kofi's heart stayed firm, shaped by the strength his father taught him. He didn't know that their plan went far beyond simple intimidation, and the truth of their cruelty would only come to light hours later. What began as a tense encounter in a dim parking lane would soon grow into a storm that touched the entire town and expose a shocking betrayal that nobody expected. The afternoon had started like any other for Kofi Mensah, a young man known in his community for his calm nature and quiet strength. Growing up as the son of Chief Bemba Mensah, he had learned from an early age that living with integrity came with blessings and battles. His father, respected by many and feared by the corrupt few, carried himself with dignity that never shook even when powerful men tried to bend him. From childhood, Kofi watched neighbors come to their home seeking guidance, protection, or comfort, and he admired how his father handled every matter with fairness and compassion. But he also saw the darker side, the threats, the warnings, the whispers outside their gate from those who resented Chief Bemba's refusal to cooperate with criminal schemes. Kofi learned to walk with caution, yet he refused to live in fear, believing his father's courage was the only path worth following. Earlier that same day, Chief Bemba had left home to attend a council meeting about land rights, an issue that often placed him in direct conflict with people who wanted to exploit the community. He reminded Kofi to stay aware of his surroundings and return home before nightfall, though neither of them expected trouble. Kofi planned only a short errand buying supplies from a modest row of shops on the edge of town. He drove his father's old but well-kept sedan, a car that held memories of family trips, school drop-offs, and long conversations during rainy evenings. To Kofi, the car was more than transportation. It was a symbol of his father's hard work and a reminder of the values he carried. That sentimental connection made what happened later even more painful. The enemies who lurked around, Kofi had not chosen him randomly. For years, Chief Bemba refused to help their illegal operations, refused their offers of money, refused their demands for silence, refused their attempts to use him as a shield. This made them furious, and their frustration grew each time the community praised Chief Bemba for his honesty. The men wanted to send a message, not only to humiliate him but to show that standing against them came with consequences. They believed hurting his son would hurt him more deeply than any political attack. But they didn't want to confront Kofi in broad daylight. They needed privacy, darkness, and the perfect moment when he was alone and unaware. That moment arrived when Kofi stepped out of the car, locked the door, and walked toward the shop without knowing eyes were following him. Inside the small store, Kofi greeted the shopkeeper, Mama Akasua, an elderly woman who knew the Mensah family well. She asked about his father, offered him groundnuts, and told him stories about the older days like she always did. He listened politely, smiling at her warmth, unaware of the danger forming outside. The shop was brightly lit and filled with comforting scents, giving him a false sense of safety. Meanwhile, just beyond the doorway, the three men tightened their circle around his car, whispering and glancing toward the store. They had watched him since he parked, noticed his relaxed posture, and concluded he posed no threat. Their plan was unfolding smoothly, and they believed no one would interfere. When Kofi finished shopping, he stepped outside and immediately sensed a strange tension in the air. The street, once calm, felt heavier, and the murmurs of the three men reached his ears. They looked at him with an unsettling mixture of mockery and menace, as if daring him to react. Kofi felt a spark of alertness, but he refused to provoke them. He simply walked toward the car with steady steps, His father taught him that not every confrontation deserved a fight, especially when dealing with people who thrived on chaos. Still, something in their faces suggested they weren't content with intimidation alone. The tallest among them, a muscular man named Temadu, stepped forward and blocked Coffee's path with a slow grin that hid cruelty beneath confidence. His companions Tano Bademi and Safu Luna fanned out behind him like shadows ready to swallow light. The trio had a reputation in town everyone knew. They aligned themselves with men who used wealth and violence to control businesses and silence critics. Kofi kept his distance, maintaining calm even as his heart beat faster. He greeted them politely, refusing to show fear, because he believed revealing his anxiety would give them the power they wanted. But the way they stared at him told him their intentions stretched far beyond conversation. Quim's voice carried a mocking friendliness as he asked why someone like Kofi drove such an old car. Knowing full well it belonged to Chief Bemba, the question struck with two layers of insult, one aimed at the vehicle, the other at Kofi's father's values. Kofi answered steadily, saying the car was meaningful to his family, but Quim only smirked harder, exchanging looks with the others. Their laughter echoed across the empty parking lane, bouncing off walls and deepening Kofi's sense that they wanted something more than ridicule. Yet he still refused to react harshly, hoping to defuse the situation and walk away without trouble. But these men did not come for peace. They came for a message. They taunted him with small jabs at his father's character, questioning why Chief Bemba refused good opportunities, suggesting he acted too holy for the world. Kofi held his ground, defending his father's principles without raising his voice. His calmness irritated them because they expected fear or anger. Quim stepped closer, invading Kofi's space, testing the boundaries. Kofi's fist clenched at his side, but he reminded himself of his father's favorite teaching: strength is not proven by swinging first. Strength is proven when your spirit remains firm. Little did he know that these lessons would be tested beyond anything he imagined tonight. After a tense exchange, the men walked away with exaggerated nonchalance, pretending the confrontation was over. Kofi released a slow breath, relieved but also uneasy, because something about their sudden retreat felt wrong. He unlocked the car and placed his items inside, unaware that he had just stepped into the first phase of a plan far bigger than himself. The real shock, the twist that would shatter his night, was still simmering in the darkness, waiting for its moment to strike. The evening wind carried a cold bite as Kofi settled behind the wheel and adjusted his breath, trying to shake off the tension of the confrontation. His hands trembled slightly, not out of fear but out of frustration at being targeted for something he never caused. Through the windshield, he watched the three men walk toward a side alley, each step whispering a silent warning that the night wasn't finished with him yet. He knew they're tight men who hid behind shadows, men who destroyed lives for amusement, men who hated his father for refusing to bow to corruption. Still, he told himself they were just trying to intimidate him, and he refused to let them win by reacting. The car engine hummed softly, filling the silence and offering a comfort that steadied his thoughts. Kofi reached for the steering wheel, hoping to drive away quickly before any further trouble found him, but before he could put the car in motion, he heard footsteps approaching again, slow and deliberate, scraping across the ground like a warning he couldn't ignore. He froze, knowing instantly that those footsteps didn't belong to an innocent passerby. A familiar voice, sharp with arrogance, called out his name as though summoning him to a challenge. Quim stepped beside the car window with an expression carved from pride and bitterness, as if demanding attention Kofi never planned to give. Tano leaned against the car door with an air of dominance that made the vehicle feel suddenly smaller and more vulnerable. Sefu hovered near the back of the car, staring at Kofi's reflection in the rear glass with a gaze that sent chills down his spine. The trio surrounded the car like hunters tightening a trap. And Kofi realized the earlier encounter was only an introduction. "Step out," Quim said, tapping the window with two fingers, each thud sending a dull vibration through Kofi's chest. His tone carried a command rather than a request, and the smirk on his face suggested he expected obedience. Kofi considered refusing, but he also knew defiance could provoke them into something reckless. He opened the door slowly, stepping out with his back straight, refusing to let them see any weakness. Quain circled him with deliberate slowness, analyzing him like a predator studying prey. Tano cracked his knuckles loudly while shifting his weight, as though preparing for a scene he deeply desired. Sefu crossed his arms and tilted his head, waiting for a chance to add pressure if the situation escalated. The three men seemed to feed off each other's presence. Creating an atmosphere thick with hostility, Quain demanded to know why Kofi had stared at them earlier, twisting simple eye contact into an excuse for confrontation. Kofi answered calmly, explaining he hadn't been staring but simply aware of his surroundings. His tone was firm yet collected, hoping to keep the situation controlled. Quain didn't appreciate the calmness, mistaking it for confidence he wanted to crush. Tano stepped closer, insisting that Kofi must think he was superior because of his father's reputation. Kofi denied it politely, but each word only deepened their irritation. They wanted him rattled, vulnerable, and small. When he refused to react the way they wanted, their patience started thinning. Quain poked a finger against Kofi's chest and accused Chief, them of treating the entire community like children. Tano added that Kofi's father believed he was untouchable. Sefu snickered as though every insult tasted sweet on his tongue, each word meant to provoke a reaction. Kofi stood tall and responded with respect, saying his father served the community with honesty and discipline. His voice was steady, but the fire behind his eyes showed that their words cut deeper than he let on. The trio exchanged glances, disappointed that he wasn't collapsing under the weight of their taunts. Quain's expression darkened, revealing that the knight's true intention was far more sinister. Tano leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper meant only for Kofi's ears, asking if he knew what happened to people who resisted powerful forces. Sefu stepped behind Kofi, boxing him in without touching him, letting silent intimidation do its work. Kofi maintained his posture, breathing deeply and refusing to let fear seize him. His father taught him that evil thrived when ordinary people surrendered, and he refused to be counted among the weak. He reminded them again that he wasn't interested in arguments or conflicts. But the more he tried to keep peace, the more insulted they felt. Like men desperate for chaos, they edged closer to the violence they craved. Finally, Quain stepped back and told the others to stand down, saying they didn't need to waste time on the boy. His tone was dismissive, almost casual, but his eyes never left Kofi's face. Something in that look felt like a warning wrapped in a promise of destruction. Tano scoffed loudly, shoving Kofi lightly as he passed him, laughing as if the shove was a childish prank. Sefu muttered an insult as he walked around the car, kicking a stone toward Kofi's feet with a deliberate flick of annoyance. The three men walked away again, pretending the incident was finished. But the strange satisfaction in their expressions left Kofi unsettled. When men like them smiled, it never meant peace. Kofi returned to the driver's seat and locked the door, trying to steady himself. He watched them disappear behind the corner of a building and hoped he wouldn't see them again. But deep in his gut, a quiet fear told him the knight wasn't done twisting. He gripped the steering wheel and reminded himself that his father faced worse dangers daily and still chose integrity. He told himself this moment would pass, just another memory that would fade with time. Yet something pulled at him, telling him to remain alert, because the silence around the parking area felt unnatural. Before driving away, he said a silent prayer for safety, not because he felt weak but because he believed in the power of humility. His mind wandered to memories of his father teaching him how to drive, reminding him to always check mirrors, brakes, and surroundings. Those memories filled him with a sense of comfort, nearly convincing him that everything would be fine. He started the engine again, but just as he reached for the gear, a loud metallic thud struck the back of the car. The sound echoed like a sudden storm cracking open the sky. Kofi jumped, his heart pounding, knowing instantly that something terrible had begun. Within seconds, shadows moved all around the car again, faster and louder than before. The three men had returned, but this time they weren't empty-handed. They carried objects in their hands, long, heavy tools that glinted under the streetlight. They didn't look like men seeking intimidation anymore. They looked like men ready to send a message the whole community would feel. Kofi's breath hitched as he peeked through the rearview mirror and saw the determination etched on their faces. He realized this moment was no longer a casual confrontation. It was a planned attack. Kwame shouted something Kofi couldn't understand, but the rage in his voice needed no translation. Sefu struck the trunk with a loud blow that made the car shake violently. Tano circled around to the other side, testing the weight of the tool in his hands. Kofi opened the door, instinctively stepping out and raising his hands to plead with them to stop. But the moment he spoke, Kwame roared at him to move back. His shout was sharp enough to freeze Kofi in place. The men didn't want discussion. They wanted destruction. Kofi slowly backed away, hands trembling as he watched them circle the car with growing intensity. He tried again to reason with them, saying his father never harmed them and he didn't deserve this. But his words vanished under the sounds of metal clashing against metal. The men swung their tools with brutal force, each hit sounding like a declaration of war. The horrifying scraping and crushing echoed across the parking lane, searing itself into Kofi's memory. He watched helplessly as the car, his father's beloved car, shuddered under the relentless assault. Each blow dented the metal deeper, stripping away the shape and beauty it once had. The sedan seemed to cry under the punishment, its windows trembling as though begging for mercy that would never come. Kofi's heart twisted painfully. Memories of family trips, laughter and stories shared inside that car flickered through his mind. He begged them again to stop, but his voice trembled with despair and could barely rise above the violent noise. Kwame glanced at him briefly, but instead of mercy, the look carried triumph. The destruction seemed to energize them, fueling their desire to break more. Sefu smashed the rear window, shards exploding outward like tiny stars scattering in every direction. Tano dented the roof repeatedly until its once smooth surface folded inward like crushed foil. The men were relentless, determined to reshape the vehicle into a symbol of their power and vengeance. Kofi felt powerless, unable to defend the car without risking his life. He thought of running for help, but the nearest homes were far and the shops were closed. Even if he found someone, the men worked far too quickly. Panic thickened in his chest as he realized he was witnessing a form of destruction meant to humiliate his father publicly. They weren't just breaking property. They were breaking pride, legacy, and dignity. Every crash of iron against metal echoed the hatred they nurtured for Chief Bemba, hatred now unleashed on his son's helpless eyes. Kofi clenched his fists tightly at his sides, torn between outrage and the fear of making things worse. When Kwame Faust, panting heavily, he pointed his tool directly at Kofi and told him to stay exactly where he stood. His voice held a warning that promised more harm if Kofi dared move. Sefu smashed the headlights next, laughing as glass rained across the ground. Tano finished by crushing the side mirrors until they dangled lifelessly. In less than 10 minutes, the car that once represented family bonds had been transformed into a crushed, twisted shell of its former self. There was nothing left to protect, nothing left to save. The men stepped back, admiring the destruction like artists judging their own twisted masterpiece. Kofi's legs weakened, but he refused to fall. His breath quivered as he took in the sight. Metal bent inward. Paint scraped off, windows shattered, and the roof flattened. The car no longer looked like a car. It looked like a giant piece of crushed tin. The shock numbed him, stealing the strength from his bones. He felt sick, angry, and heartbroken all at once, but he also felt something deeper: determination. He didn't know how he would fix this, but he knew running away or hiding wouldn't help. His father deserved to know the truth, and justice deserved to rise above fear. Kwame stepped forward, stopping mere inches from Kofi's face. His breath carried rage, and his eyes reflected a darkness that didn't belong to ordinary troublemakers. He whispered that this was only the beginning, and if Chief Bemba continued rejecting offers, the next target wouldn't be property. It was a threat delivered quietly, but it struck Kofi's soul with violent force. Fear crawled up his spine, melting into anger that burned hotter with every heartbeat. But he kept control, refusing to let the men see the fire growing inside him. Kwame smirked at his silence, interpreting it as defeat, then motioned for the others to follow him. The 3 men walked away without looking back. their silhouettes fading into the night. The once quiet packing lane now held the heavy breath of violence, destruction, and a story that would soon shake the entire community. Kofi stood alone beside the crushed vehicle, his reflection warped in the twisted metal. The silence felt louder than the destruction. His heart ached, but his spirit stood firm. He knew this night wasn't just an act of vandalism, it was a warning, a declaration of war against his father's principles. He looked at the sky, blinking away the tears threatening to fall. The weight of the moment crushed him, yet it also awakened something strong inside him. This night would not end in silence. This story would not end with fear. Kofi took a deep breath, preparing for the long road of consequences, truth, and justice that awaited him. The destruction of the car was only the beginning of a storm that would expose secrets, test loyalty, and reveal the true power of integrity in a corrupted world. Kofi stood in the dim light long after the attackers vanished, staring at the crushed remains of the car that once carried so many memories. The silence pressed on his chest, leaving him unsure whether to scream or collapse. He walked slowly around the vehicle, touching the dented sides with trembling fingers as if hoping they would somehow spring back to their original shape. Each crushed panel felt like a blow to his father's history. Each shattered window a painful reminder of the cruelty people unleashed when their pride was bruised. The night felt colder, sharp enough to cut through his composure and reveal every emotion he tried to hide. He took deep breaths to calm the rising panic, reminding himself that falling apart would solve nothing. His father always taught him that storms, no matter how violent, must be met with endurance. Those teachings steadied him now as he struggled to accept the reality of what had happened. Even though his heart felt heavy, something inside him refused to surrender. When he finally gathered the courage, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers hovered over his father's contact, unsure whether calling him at this hour would cause more panic or bring necessary help. The last thing Kofi wanted was to disrupt the council meeting, especially when community leaders depended on Chief Bemba's guidance. But this wasn't a small matter he could hide or fix on his own. The magnitude of the destruction left him with no option but honesty. After a deep breath, he finally pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before his father answered, his voice calm but alert as always. Kofi hesitated for a brief moment, then began explaining everything that happened. Chief Bemba listened without interrupting. But the silence on the other end of the line carried a weight Kofi had never felt before. It wasn't fear. His father rarely showed fear, but disappointment and anger, intertwined in a way that made the air around Kofi feel even heavier. After a long pause, Bemba told him to stay where he was and that he would arrive shortly. Kofi could almost hear the gears turning in his father's mind, predicting every possible consequence of the night's attack. When the call ended, Kofi leaned against a wall, his legs finally giving up their strength. The wind blew harder now, rustling through the nearby trees and carrying the scent of dust and metal. Waiting felt harder than facing the attackers themselves. 10 minutes later, headlights approached from the far end of the quiet road. A dark SUV pulled up, and Chief Bemba stepped out with a controlled intensity that made Kofi's stomach tighten. Bemba wasn't a large man, but his presence carried a gravity that commanded respect everywhere he went. Tonight, however, his expression held a depth of pain Kofi rarely saw. His eyes moved over the devastated car, taking in every crushed part, every broken piece, every violent mark left behind. When he finally looked at his son, Kofi felt the full weight of the moment settle between them. No words were needed to express how deeply the sight wounded him. After a long silence, Bemba placed a steady hand on Kofi's shoulder and asked if he was hurt. Kofi shook his head, though the emotional bruises ran deep. His father's gaze softened briefly, showing relief that his son remained unharmed. But the relief quickly transformed into something stronger, a fire of determination that ignited behind his eyes. He asked Kofi to explain every detail from the moment he parked the car until the final blow. Kofi recounted everything carefully, describing the men, their words, their movements, and the weapons they carried. Bemba listened without interrupting, absorbing each piece of information with the focus of someone preparing for a difficult battle. When Kofi finished, Bemba exhaled slowly and told him something he had always avoided saying aloud. There were people in the community who would do anything to break him. They despised him because he blocked profitable schemes, rejected criminal proposals, and refused to be bought by wealth or power. These men believed influence belonged to those who could intimidate, manipulate, or destroy without consequence. Bemba's honest leadership threatened their grip on the town, and harming Kofi was their latest attempt to force his compliance. Hearing this truth made Kofi's chest tighten, not from fear but from anger at how low people could sink when their greed overflowed. Bemba walked slowly around the car, crouching to inspect deeper damage with a sorrow that felt almost personal. That sedan wasn't valuable in money, but it held decades of memories: road trips with family, journeys to ancestral ceremonies, and late-night drives while sharing wisdom with his son. Seeing it crushed like rubbish stirred emotions he normally kept private. Kofi felt the sting of guilt, even though he knew he wasn't to blame. His father noticed the guilt in his eyes and immediately told him not to carry the weight of others' sins. "The enemy attacked because of who I am," Bemba said softly. "Not because of anything you did." He then instructed Kofi to leave the car as it was and accompany him home. They would handle the matter carefully, not recklessly. Standing up to criminals required wisdom, not impulse, and Bemba had learned long ago that reacting violently only escalated situations. Still, the night's destruction demanded a response, and his silence held the promise of one. As they prepared to leave, Bemba took one last long look at the twisted metal before locking the gate behind them. The car remained in the lonely parking lane like a broken monument to a war that had only begun. The ride home felt longer than usual. The SUV's interior was quiet, but the silence between father and son carried unspoken emotions. Streetlights flickered past the windows, illuminating Kofi's tense expression. He replayed the attack repeatedly in his mind, each memory clearer than the last. The metallic blows, the mocking laughter, the threats, they all echoed through his thoughts like a storm that refused to calm. His father occasionally glanced at him as if scanning his face for new signs of distress. Kofi appreciated the silent support, though he also sensed the magnitude of responsibility Bemba carried. When they arrived home, the lights in the house were still on. Kofi's mother, Amaserwa, hurried outside the moment she saw the SUV pull in. Her face held deep worry as she rushed toward them, embracing her son tightly. She asked what happened, and the moment Bemba said the car had been destroyed, her hand flew to her mouth in shock. She never liked conflict, but she supported her husband's dedication to justice even when it put their family at risk. Tonight, however, her eyes filled with tears, not because of the car, but because her son had been in danger. Kofi reassured her he was unharmed, though the trembling in his voice betrayed his lingering anxiety. She cupped his face gently, whispering a prayer of gratitude before leading him inside. Bemba followed them, locking the door with unusual caution. Once indoors, the heaviness of the evening settled even deeper around the family. Ama insisted Kofi sit and drink warm tea, hoping it would calm his nerves. Bemba remained standing, pacing slowly as he processed what the next steps should be. His movements were controlled, but the tension radiating from him filled the room. Ama finally asked the question pressing hardest on her mind: "Who did this?" Bemba answered with a stiff jaw, explaining the truth Kofi had recounted. At the mention of the attackers' names, Ama closed her eyes in pain. She had heard of Kwemtano and Sefa, men who thrived under criminal mentors and believed fear was the easiest path to influence. She feared their growing confidence, knowing it reflected a larger problem in their town. The thought of them targeting her son made her heart tighten painfully. After a long pause, Emma asked what the family should do next. Bemba responded with calm certainty that they would not act out of rage. He would speak to the elders, gather evidence, and follow proper channels. But he also mentioned that this attack exposed something deeper: an organized effort to destabilize those who refuse corruption. The destruction of the car wasn't a random act. It was a calculated message. And messages of that kind didn't stay small for long. His voice remained calm, but his eyes held a promise that justice would find its way through the darkness. Kofi sat quietly, listening to every word. The pain of losing the car still stung, but hearing his parents discuss the situation with such clarity gave him strength. He realized that the attack wasn't truly about him. It was about breaking his father's will. But if anything, the incident had only strengthened his resolve to stand firm beside his father's principles. He wasn't just the son of a respected leader, he was a witness to the truth, a bearer of a story that deserved to be told. After finishing his tea, Kofi finally spoke, saying he wanted to help however he could. His voice was stronger now, carrying a maturity he hadn't felt earlier. His father studied him for a moment, then nodded with pride. Elma squeezed Kofi's hand gently, reminding him that courage shouldn't erase caution. The three of them shared a quiet moment of unity, each knowing the road ahead would be challenging. Later that night, after his parents went to rest, Kofi stepped outside onto the veranda. The moon hung low in the sky, illuminating the compound with a soft glow. The peacefulness outside felt strange after such a violent evening, but it also brought clarity. Kofi inhaled deeply, letting the cool night air settle inside him. He knew sleep would be difficult. Too much weighed on his mind. He thought of the car, the attackers, the threat, and the responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. As he stood there, he sensed movement at the far end of the compound. A shadow shifted behind the fence, moving slowly like someone trying to remain unseen. Kofi's heartbeat quickened, and he stepped closer, trying to catch a clearer glimpse. The moonlight revealed a silhouette slipping away into the darkness. The figure didn't speak or linger, but its presence was unmistakable. Someone had been watching their home, possibly the same people who attacked him earlier. The realization sent a chill down his spine. He quickly returned inside and alerted his father, who came out to inspect the area. Themba scanned the surroundings with sharp eyes but saw nothing but still trees and silent grass. He didn't dismiss Kofi's claim, though. Instead, he told him that the attackers would not stop easily, especially after sending such a bold message. They would expect fear. They would wait for silence. They would watch for hesitation. But the Mensah family would give them none of those things. Themba reminded Kofi that enemies reveal themselves not only through their actions but also through their persistence. If someone watched the house tonight, it meant they feared the family's resilience more than they admitted. That fear could be turned into strength if handled with intelligence and caution. The two returned indoors, locking every entry with deliberate care. The night continued quietly, but the awareness of being watched lingered like a shadow in the room. As Kofi prepared for bed, he felt a shift inside him, something awakening, something determined. The pain of the night had shaped a new resolve. He realized that their fight wasn't just about a car or a confrontation in a parking lane. It was about protecting truth, safeguarding the community, and defending the legacy of integrity his father built. He closed his eyes with a promise to himself. The attackers may have destroyed the car, but they would not destroy the values the Mensah family stood for. And in the days to come, the consequences of their actions would unfold in ways none of them expected. Kofi sat on a wooden stool inside Officer Senakuro's small home office, his eyes fixed on the cracked wall while his mind replayed the painful chaos of the night. Sena had taken him away from the public eye and placed him in a safe corner, but even safety felt temporary with danger crawling through every thought. The burning sharpness of humiliation still clung to him, especially the sound of iron rods smashing the car that belonged to his hard-working father. At that moment he had been powerless, surrounded by enemies who celebrated each violent blow with cruel laughter. Sena watched him carefully, trying to understand how deeply this had wounded him beyond the bruises on his face and arms. Kofi took a slow breath and finally whispered that he felt responsible for what happened, even though he knew he shouldn't. Sena reminded him gently that the attackers hadn't chosen him randomly. They were targeting his father through him. That single truth made the air around them feel heavier, and the room filled with a suffocating sense of unfinished danger. As dawn crept in, Sena took out a notebook and asked Kofi to tell the entire story again, but slowly this time. The officer wanted every detail because something about this attack didn't feel like a simple act of street hostility. Kofi explained how he had parked the car beside the row of shops, stepped out for a moment, and noticed 3 figures whispering while watching him. He felt uneasy but tried to stay calm, believing they would mind their own business. Then, as he returned toward the car, they approached with an arrogance that showed they recognized him. One of them mentioned his father's name, and that was the moment Kofi understood the danger was not about him as an individual but about the man who raised him. The iron rods appeared as if they had been waiting for this moment, ready to turn the car into something unrecognizable. Senna scribbled quickly, nodding to himself as he confirmed that this wasn't random, it was planned, intentional and deeply motivated. The officer muttered that something much larger was happening behind the scenes. After finishing the statement, Senna leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead with troubled tension. He explained to Kofi that he had been hearing whispers for months about a growing illegal network, led by Oberi Sheku, a man who once pretended to help the community but was secretly using his wealth to control it. Senna said Oberi had been trying to force Chief Bemba Mensah into supporting their illicit operations, especially transportation routes that would make their smuggling easier. Chief Bemba refused every meeting, every bribe, and every hidden offer. This refusal, repeated over months, turned into a bitter war. The more Chief Bemba resisted, the more Oberi's men tried to undermine him. Kofi felt his stomach twist as he realized the attack wasn't only about revenge. It was a strategy to break his father's spirit. Every crushed piece of the car, every swing of the iron rods, was part of a bigger message. Break your honesty, or we break your life. As the sun climbed higher, Senna decided they couldn't stay in his home much longer. He feared that Oberi's network had spies everywhere, and if they discovered where Kofi was hiding, the next attack would be worse. Senna called his trusted friend, Elder Nanakusa, a respected man who lived on the far side of the community. Nanakusa was known for his wisdom, bravery, and loyalty to Chief Bemba. He was someone the criminal network feared because he spoke only truth and never bowed to manipulation. Senna drove Kofi in an old pickup truck, keeping to back roads and side paths to avoid attention. Kofi stared out the window at the passing farmlands and homes, feeling each bump in the road echo through his chest. He wondered how many people were quietly suffering because of Oberi's growing influence. Senna reassured him that they weren't alone in this fight, but they had to be careful. Once they reached Nanakusa's compound, the officer whispered that this place would keep him hidden for a few hours. While he informed Chief Bemba about everything, Nanakusa welcomed Kofi with both kindness and seriousness in his eyes. His compound was peaceful, a place where birds sang in the mango trees and the breeze carried the smell of fresh earth. But beneath the calm atmosphere, Kofi sensed that this elder understood the danger far better than he did. Nanakusa offered him food, but Kofi barely touched it because his thoughts remained heavy. After allowing him a moment to breathe, the elder sat beside him under a wide shade tree and began to speak. He told Kofi that the fight between his father and Oberi Kweku wasn't new. It had started long before Kofi was old enough to understand politics or power struggles. Chief Bemba had opposed Oberi's secret activities because he believed the community deserved fairness, safety, and honesty. Oberi, on the other hand, believed control, fear, and manipulation were easier ways to gain influence. Their clash grew over time until Oberi decided to strike at something. Chief Bemba loved his children. Nanakusa explained that Kofi had been followed for months, though he didn't notice because the watchers kept their distance and observed silently. Their goal wasn't to attack immediately but to study his habits and movements. They looked for the moment when he would be alone, away from people who would intervene. When they saw him parked beside the shops that night, they knew it was their chance. They didn't burn the car the way Oberi's men had done to others in the past. This time they wanted something more symbolic. Crushing the car into a tin-like heap using iron rods was their way of showing that anything belonging to Chief Bemba could be reduced to nothing. The elder's voice carried sadness as he spoke, but also a firm strength that comforted Kofi. He assured the boy that the attack wasn't his fault, and he had shown remarkable courage by escaping. Just as Nanakusa finished speaking, a soft knock came from the gate. Amawa, a young woman who worked closely with the elder, rushed inside with urgent worry on her face. She told them she had overheard men asking, around the main junction for anyone who saw the boy with Chief Bemba's blood. Kofi felt a chill run through him. Because that phrase was the exact threat the bullies had whispered during the attack. Nanakusa asked if the men were still near the junction, and Amawa nodded seriously. He then told Kofi that they needed to move again before the men started searching homes. Nanakusa couldn't risk the boy being found on his property. He asked Amawa to escort him through a secret footpath behind the farmlands to the home of Chief Bemba's cousin, Adamakuni, who lived in a quiet corner away from the center of trouble. Kofi followed Amawa quickly, though his legs felt heavier than ever. The early morning dew soaked their feet, and the sound of distant motorcycles grew louder behind them. Amawa explained that Oberi's men were likely dividing into teams to locate him before sunrise. She reminded him to stay low and keep moving, even if fear tried to freeze him in place. The path they took was narrow, covered in vines and tall grass, but it offered more safety than open roads. As they moved, Kofi asked Amawa how long the community had been dealing with Oberi's influence. She said it started subtly, with friendly investments and small gestures of generosity. But as soon as Oberi gained people's trust, he used it to silence them. Those who questioned him were threatened, and some faced mysterious misfortunes. Only Chief Bemba stood firm and refused to be used. Halfway along the path, Amawa pulled Kofi behind a cluster of thick bushes. 2 motorcycles sped past on the next road, their riders scanning the area with restless aggression. Kofi felt his heart beat so fast that he feared the men might hear it. Amawa waited patiently until the motorcycles disappeared into the distance, then signaled for him to move again. The clouds above began to brighten, but the rising sun offered no comfort because danger remained close behind them. As they approached the riverbank, Amawa paused again, her instincts sensing something off. She peeked around a tree and saw 2 more men standing near the wooden bridge, talking loudly about searching every corner until the boy is captured. Kofi swallowed hard. Realizing he was the reason the town felt trapped in fear at that moment, Amawa decided they couldn't use the bridge. Instead, she led him to a shallow part of the river where large stones formed a natural crossing. They stepped carefully across the stones, trying not to slip or make loud splashes. When they reached the other side, they hurried through a quiet plantain field that led toward Adamakuni's home. Kofi kept glancing behind him, imagining motorcycles bursting through the trees at any moment. Amawa reassured him softly, reminding him that they were close to safety. Finally, after several minutes of intense walking, they reached Adoma's high wooden gate. Amawa knocked 3 times in a pattern only trusted family members knew. Adama opened the gate with a serious expression, immediately ushering them inside. When he saw Kofi's shaken face and dusty clothes, Adama locked the gate firmly, then guided them into a spacious living room where woven mats covered the floor and clay lamps glowed warmly on the walls. He offered Kofi water and placed a blanket over his shoulders as the boy trembled from anxiety and exhaustion. Amawa explained everything she had witnessed, and Adama listened with growing anger. He promised that no one would find Kofi here, not while he was alive, to defend him. Kofi felt safe for the first time since the attack, but he also felt a deep determination rising inside him. He realized he couldn't keep running forever. He needed answers, he needed clarity, and he needed to know how far Oberi's gang would go to destroy his father. When Adama finished preparing breakfast and placed it before him, Kofi knew only one thing for certain. The terrible night he survived was only the beginning of a storm, and he would have to face the rest of it with courage he never knew he possessed. Kofi woke up from a brief, uneasy sleep on Adamakuni's woven mat, his chest still heavy with the memory of the night's cruelty. The early morning light entered the room through small clay-framed windows, painting soft patterns on the walls. For a moment, Kofi wondered if everything that happened had been a dream, but the tension in his shoulders reminded him it was painfully real. Adama sat across the room sharpening a long farming tool, his expression calm but his movements filled with quiet determination. When he noticed Kofi was awake, he set the tool aside and asked gently if the boy felt strong enough to talk. Kofi nodded slowly, though his voice remained trapped in the knot of fear inside him. Adama leaned closer and explained that they needed to prepare for what came next, because O'Berry's network wouldn't stop searching. He emphasized that the men hunting him weren't acting alone, they were following orders from a powerful leader who felt threatened. And until the truth was fully exposed, Kofi had to stay hidden and alert. After giving Kofi a warm plate of food, Adama motioned for him to sit near the fireplace. The older man had something to reveal, something Kofi needed to hear even if it hurt. He explained that the attack was not simply a one-night incident, but the final step of a plan that O'Berry had been organizing for weeks. Kofi listened carefully as Adama revealed that O'Berry's men had formed a small, ruthless unit specifically assigned to pressure families connected to the chief. This included spreading rumors, sabotaging vehicles, threatening workers, and making subtle displays of violence to shake community confidence. But with Chief Bemba remaining firm, O'Berry grew impatient. That was why the attack on Kofi had been planned with such intensity. Adama added that the iron rods used to destroy the car were not chosen randomly. They were symbolic tools used by the network to intimidate anyone who refused their demands. When they smashed the car until it looked like a flattened piece of tin, they wanted Chief Bemba to understand that his resistance could lead to worse losses. Kofi felt anger rising inside him and continued. The older man explained that the attackers had recorded the destruction, intending to send the video to O'Berry's informants before sunrise. This video would serve as proof that the message had been delivered and the boy had been targeted. However, something unexpected happened during the attack. Kofi's desperate escape interrupted their filming, causing the men to chase him rather than complete their assignment. This mistake infuriated O'Berry, who didn't tolerate unfinished tasks. Adama said that once O'Berry learned the boy had survived, he doubled the search and promised a heavy reward to any man who brought him news of Kofi's location. The pressure had grown so rapidly that even innocent residents were terrified to speak or move freely. Kofi clenched his fists tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility and realizing the attack had spread fear far beyond his own home. He wondered how much more his father had endured to protect their community. Just as Adama finished speaking, a loud knock echoed through the compound walls. Amala rushed into the room and gestured for both of them to stay silent. She whispered that a group of armed men had been spotted walking toward the outer fence, scanning the area with careful eyes. Kofi's heart started racing, but Adama remained composed. He walked to the back window, peeked outside, and confirmed that these men were not the usual patrols. They moved with purpose, checking each house one by one. Adama signaled for Kofi to move into the small storage room hidden behind the inner wall. The room was dark and narrow, filled with baskets of dried cassava and tools, but it was the safest place to hide. As Kofi settled inside, Adama grabbed a wooden staff and walked calmly toward the front door. Amala stayed near the fireplace, pretending to tend to a pot. Her expression controlled despite the tension in her muscles. When the men reached Adoma's gate, they called his name loudly, demanding to know if he had seen the boy who caused trouble last night. Adama responded with a calm voice, saying he had been home all morning and hadn't heard anything unusual. The men insisted on entering the house, claiming they carried an important message for him from O'Berry. Adama stepped aside, allowing them in, but kept a measured distance. The men surveyed the room, looked around the corners, and even stepped into the hallway leading to the storehouse. Kofi held his breath in the darkness, praying they wouldn't find the hidden door. One of the men mentioned that O'Berry believed the boy had received help from someone loyal to Chief Bemba, and that anyone protecting him would be punished. Adama responded with a stern voice, reminding them that this was his home and he would not be threatened. The men glared at him before finally stepping out. But the message was clear: they would return after the intruders left. Adama locked the gate again and hurried to the storage room. Kofi emerged slowly, his legs trembling from the tension. Adama told him that this situation could not continue. The more time passed, the more danger they all faced. He suggested they move Kofi to another location, one even deeper within the forest where O'Berry's men rarely ventured. Amala agreed, saying she had a distant relative named Esuba who lived in a quiet hut near the old quarry. Few people knew the path, and even fewer traveled there. They decided they would leave at midday when the streets were busiest, making it harder for Oberi's spies to notice. As they began preparing supplies for the move, Kofi asked Adama a question he had been holding inside. Why did Oberi hate his father so deeply? Adama paused, then began to reveal the painful truth behind the long-standing conflict. He explained that years ago, Oberi and Chief Bemba were once allies in community development. They worked together to improve schools, fix water systems, and create business opportunities. But when Oberi discovered illegal trade routes that promised quick wealth, he abandoned their shared mission. He wanted Chief Bemba to join him, believing that with the chief's influence, the illegal operations would run smoothly without interference. But Chief Bemba refused, refusing not once but repeatedly. This rejection humiliated Oberi, who felt betrayed by a man he once considered a friend. Over time, Oberi's wealth grew from these illegal ventures, but his power remained limited because Chief Bemba continued speaking openly against corruption. The more Chief Bemba defended justice, the more Oberi's anger turned into obsession. Destroying the car, attacking Kofi, and terrorizing the community were all steps toward breaking Bemba's moral strength. By midday, the sun blazed high above them as they prepared to leave. Amawa tied a scarf around her head and covered Kofi with an oversized coat to make him less recognizable. Adama carried a large sack filled with food and essentials. The streets were bustling with workers, students, and market sellers, creating the perfect distraction. They moved swiftly through the crowds, pretending to blend into everyday life. Kofi stayed close to Amawa, keeping his head low while Adama scanned the surroundings for suspicious movements. They reached the end of the village road without encountering trouble, but as they turned onto the narrow forest path, a disturbing silence settled over the group. Kofi sensed it immediately. Something didn't feel right. Adama signaled for them to stop, listening intently to the faint rustle of bushes behind them. Within seconds, a small group of men stepped out from the trees, blocking the path. Kofi recognized one of them instantly. He was among the attackers who had smashed the car. The man twirled an iron rod casually in his hand, his lips curving into a sinister smirk. He mocked Kofi for running and claimed that Oberi had grown impatient. Adama stepped forward, gripping his wooden staff tightly, ready to defend the boy. Amawa stood to the side, searching for an opening in case they needed to escape. The men approached slowly, their confidence fueled by the thought that they finally had Kofi cornered. But before anyone could react, the sound of footsteps thundered behind them. More figures emerged, this time familiar faces. Chief Bemba Mensa walked into the clearing, surrounded by several trustworthy community members who had tracked the attackers' movements since dawn. Kofi felt relief flood through him as he saw his father's strong posture and determined eyes. Chief Bemba commanded the attackers to stand down, his voice ringing with authority. He declared that their violent acts had gone too far, and the community would no longer tolerate their intimidation. The attackers hesitated, realizing they were outnumbered and exposed. Chief Bemba revealed that he had gathered evidence of Oberi's illegal operations, including testimonies from former allies who had decided to speak. The community was finally ready to confront the criminal network, and the authorities had been alerted. The attackers, now shaken, dropped their weapons and fled into the forest. Chief Bemba pulled Kofi into a tight embrace, whispering that he was proud of his courage. Kofi held on to his father, letting the tension of the past hours wash away in tears he could no longer hold back. They walked back to the village together. Chief Bemba explained that the attack on Kofi had sparked the community's awakening. People realized how dangerous Oberi had become and decided they would no longer keep silent out of fear. The truth about the smashed car, the attempted kidnapping, and the illegal scheme spread quickly. The people rallied behind Chief Bemba, demanding justice and protection. Oberi Kwaku was forced into hiding as authorities closed in on him. Kofi, though still shaken, felt something powerful growing inside him: strength, resilience, and a deeper understanding of what leadership meant. He knew that the road ahead would still be challenging. But with his father and the community standing united, the darkness surrounding them began to fade. The village was quiet now. But the air carried a different energy, one filled with relief, hope, and a cautious sense of triumph. Kofi walked alongside his father, Chief Bemba, feeling the weight of the past days slowly lifting from his shoulders. The forest path they had taken to evade danger now seemed almost serene, bathed in golden light from the late afternoon sun. He could still feel the ache from fear and the tension that had gripped him since the car was destroyed. But it was replaced by a new strength, a realization that courage could emerge even in the darkest moments. Chief Bemba's firm hand on his shoulder reminded him that he was not alone, that the values his father had lived by were now his guiding compass. As they reached the village, Kofi noticed the way the community had gathered near the central square. Faces that had once been fearful now held expressions of pride and determination. People were speaking openly about what had happened, sharing their experiences and vowing to stand together against those who tried to harm them. Kofi understood that the attack had been a turning point. The destruction of the car, once a symbol of fear, had become a catalyst for unity. What had initially seemed like an unbearable loss now carried a hidden blessing. It revealed the courage that lay dormant within both Kofi and the village itself. Even the twisted iron rods which had flattened the car into tin became a metaphor, reminder that corruption and violence could bend material things but never break the spirit of honesty. Chief Bemba called a meeting under the large baobab tree at the heart of the village. People gathered from all directions, carrying baskets, tools, and children on their hips, their eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity, relief, and respect. The chief spoke with a voice both firm and warm, explaining that the recent events were a warning for the community to protect what was rightfully theirs: peace, honesty, and justice. He praised Kofi for his courage, making it clear that the boy's resilience had inspired others. The younger children looked up at Kofi with wide eyes, whispering about his bravery, while elders nodded knowingly, recognizing the strength it took to face such dangers. Kofi, though still timid in front of so many, felt a swell of pride. He realized that courage was not about the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. News of the attack and the community's response soon reached surrounding villages. Traders, farmers, and neighbors came to witness the unity that Chief Bemba had fostered. They brought gifts, food, and supplies, not out of obligation but as a gesture of solidarity. Kofi noticed that the villagers were no longer whispering in fear. They spoke openly about Oberi's network and how the destruction of the car had been a cowardly attempt to intimidate them. The truth about the iron rods, the flattened vehicle, and the attempted capture of Kofi was now public knowledge, exposing the cruelty of those who sought to manipulate the community. Chief Bemba used the moment to remind everyone that fear could only thrive in silence. And silence had now been broken. Days passed, and the aftermath of the attack revealed layers of consequences Kofi had never imagined. Oberi's men were gradually captured or fled the area, their plans dismantled by Chief Bemba's foresight and the community's cooperation. The authorities, once hesitant, acted decisively after receiving testimonies from those who had witnessed the events. The destroyed car was eventually removed from the compound, but the memory of it lingered not as a symbol of loss, but as a story that reminded everyone of resilience, courage, and justice. Kofi often revisited the spot where the car had lain, tracing the twisted metal with his hands, reflecting on how something that once caused fear could become a lesson in strength and moral clarity. In the evenings, Kofi would sit with his father outside their home, watching the sky turn from orange to deep indigo. They would speak of the lessons learned, of how honesty and integrity could make enemies, but ultimately foster respect and loyalty. Chief Bemba explained that power was not measured by the wealth one accumulated or the fear one could instill, but by the principles one stood for and the lives one uplifted. Kofi listened intently, absorbing each word, understanding that he was no longer a passive observer of life's dangers, but a participant in shaping justice for his community. He felt the weight of responsibility growing within him, but it was a comforting weight, one that reminded him that courage and moral clarity were inherited, nurtured, and honed. Over time, the village regained its rhythm. Market days resumed with laughter echoing through the streets. Children ran freely without fear, and neighbors began helping one another openly. Kofi found himself more confident, walking through the marketplace not just as a boy who had survived danger, but as someone who had witnessed justice unfold. People greeted him warmly, and he could sense the change in their perception. He was no longer just the son of Chief Bemba, but a symbol of hope and resilience. He understood now more than ever that even small acts of courage could ripple outward, influencing countless lives in ways he had never imagined. Chief Bemba continued his work as a leader, guiding the village with the same honesty that had drawn the wrath of Oberi in the first place. Yet he also took measures to protect those he loved. He trained trusted community members in vigilance, ensuring that Kofi, Amawa, and others could live without constant fear. He reinforced that justice required both action and wisdom, and that every step taken should reflect the values they cherished. Kofi, walking beside him, realized that his father's strength lay not only in physical courage but in moral courage, the ability to remain steadfast even when facing overwhelming threats. The story of the destroyed car eventually reached distant villages and towns. Traders would recount how Oberi's men, using iron rods, had tried to flatten the vehicle, intending to terrify the chief's family. But the narrative shifted quickly. It became a story of triumph over intimidation, a tale of courage that inspired others to stand against wrongdoing. Kofi understood the full twist now. The attackers had intended to crush him symbolically and physically, but instead they had inadvertently strengthened him, revealing the power of integrity and the loyalty it inspired. The community's response had turned a moment of potential defeat into a defining moment of victory. As the sun set one evening, casting long shadows over the village, Kofi stood atop a small hill, gazing at the horizon. He thought of the iron rods, the flattened car, the fear he had felt, and the bravery he had discovered within himself. The village below hummed with life, laughter, and renewed energy. In that moment, he understood the profound truth. True power was not in destruction or wealth, but in honesty, courage, and the strength to protect what is right. Kofi smiled faintly, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and anticipation for the future. Though challenges would come again, he knew that together with his father, his friends, and the community, they could face anything with dignity and resilience. Kofi finally turned to Chief Bemba, who had been standing silently behind him. "Father," he said softly, "I understand now. Courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about standing firm when it matters most." Chief Bemba nodded, a proud smile lighting his face. "Exactly, my son. And today, you have shown that you are ready to carry that courage forward." The two of them walked back toward the village, their steps steady and confident. Around them, the villagers continued their daily lives, unaware of how close danger had come, but forever inspired by the quiet bravery of one boy and the unwavering honesty of his father. The day ended with a peaceful calm. But the story of courage, justice, and resilience would be told for generations, a reminder that even in the face of iron rods and tin cars, honesty and bravery would always triumph. If Kofi's courage and the honesty of his father inspired you, don't let this story end here. Subscribe to our channel and join our growing family of viewers who believe in the power of bravery, integrity, and standing up for what is right. Hit the notification bell so you never miss the next emotional tale filled with suspense, life lessons, and unforgettable twist. Share this video with your friends and family, because stories like these remind us all that even in the darkest moments, one person's courage can change everything. Comment below and tell us which part of Kofi's journey touched your heart the most, or share a story from your own life where honesty and bravery made a difference. Your one comment, like, and share supports us more than you know, helping us bring you more stories that inspire, empower, and move you. Stay with us. The next story will leave you speechless.